I genuinely thought this tank would be terrible, and I was completely wrong. It could not have been any better when I was playing this vehicle. It's definitely not OP, but we're going to find out why this tank is really, really good within the game. It is a Comet, or at least the skinned version of the Comet, which is a premium and can earn you a little bit of extra kind of silver when you're playing in this tank. I think it's only like 35% silver bonus, so it's nothing too major, but the whole point about this video is to showcase what the Banshee Comet can actually do within the game and the Comet itself, and why it's one of my most favoured medium tanks at tier 7, if not the most favoured medium tank. I have remarked this vehicle, or at least the Comet version. That is the tech tree, and of course you can play this tank for free in basically the Comet, so you don't have to actually purchase this premium, but if you are interested in getting like a nice skin for it, then maybe you want to go for this. But one thing that I want to showcase is the thing about, you know, traditionally on modder tanks, if you've got higher alpha, it makes it easier for you to do really well. But the problem with high alpha is that although you can far more consistently deal a lot more damage, the problem is that when you've got high alpha, you kind of limit the amount of damage per minute you can have, which makes it very difficult to have the like super high damage results, which you can see from things like, I don't know, the Jaeger and stuff like that, because the opportunity, the game has to fall in your favour where you're able to fire every single time you reload. And yes, you're going to get those opportunities normally, but how many opportunities are you going to get to deal 1,000 damage in the Jaeger every single time? And therefore, you know, how effective can it be as you get further on in the game to do like the high damage rounds? Whereas when you've got something like a Centurion Action X and the game where you kind of get the right scenario, but you are consistently dealing 490 damage per shell, that is where these tanks come into effect, and why you can have really high damage games, but probably a lot less consistently with these vehicles. Everything really comes down to the fact that you have to be playing on point. You can't really just sit back and relax when you're playing in a tank that reloads in about 2.5 seconds, or 2.8 seconds as you're seeing here. It does do 150 damage per shell, which is really nice. The Comet is one of my favourites in terms of being able to rack up a lot of damage super quickly, and although you might think, oh, I'm only doing 150 damage per shell, when you're hitting people every 2.8 seconds or 2.9 when you're not using your enhanced combat rations, then yeah, you're gonna find yourself able to just do a lot of things in the game and impact the game in a lot of variety of different ways, as well as the fact that, remember, when you're in a medium tank, typically, because when someone uses a higher alpha damage gun, you often end up that your view range and like some of the small factors of the game kind of get removed, or at least they kind of get reduced because you've got the higher alpha damage. So with a tank like this, they give you good all-round stats, and that's why I love the Comet in its entirety, and why things like the Action X, the FV4202, they're all tanks I absolutely love within the game. Now, in this replay, we've picked up 1,400 damage, or thereabouts, and it's been a very kind of slow start to the game since we've been kind of sat up here. I always like to kind of come up to this sort of area to be able to get my early damage, get people as they're crossing, but this is where the game point slightly turns and where we can start dominating as a top tier medium tank against opponents. Now, a lot of people, they might go, oh, why were you playing passively at the beginning of the game? And it's like, well, this tank is not a aggressive tank. It has no armor, to be honest with you. This tank is going to get hit every single time. It's not a heavy, it doesn't have the alpha to trade on a corner. You should never be using the fast firing damage guns as traders. You should not even put yourself in a scenario where you're going to be realistically fighting against people that maybe get into your way, or maybe you're going to have to poke or show any part of your armor to deal damage to them. You want to be getting around the back, the sides, the rear, anything that you can do to really negate the fact that someone can hit you. And of course, this tank has pretty decent mobility. It felt really actually good to use. Now, you know, that's kind of dependent on who you are and whether you like play and like the responsiveness, or whether you'd rather play in a clown car that can go around just constantly and is really hard to control. This one is the right speed, and also it keeps and maintains that speed really well. I'm having some issues trying to actually hit this setter on the move now. In this sort of scenario, trying to aim in on the move is probably not your best bet, because you don't know where the setter's going to go. It's far easier to use it when you're on the move and where you're able to kind of fire on the move using your free aim. Now we hit the setter there, finish him off, and we also spot the A44, which is nice. We bounce around from what I believe it was the T25/2, the tank destroyer on the enemy team. We've also got artillery probably coming in towards us, because yet again, the armor model of the Comet is not good, so you are not going to be bouncing anything, as we've already suggested. But this is something I absolutely love using within the game. It just offers so much versatility, and one of my kind of fine tanks that I like playing. And actually I thought, having gone through years and years without playing the Comet, it's been a long time. I mean, I went for the Action X probably a few years ago now at this point, but I still enjoy playing the Comet now, and it really does still hold up in the meta. I don't think you can really get away from the fact that you're when you have the speed, the maneuverability and the flexibility, because don't forget that these vehicles have the gun depression as well. So not only do you have the firepower, or at least lots of minuscule amounts of firepower, then you can do really well. But one thing I do forget to mention about the firepower whilst we're on the topic is that yes, you do kind of end up getting shafted by artillery, but also the penetration of the standard rounds is pretty bad on the Comet. I don't know why Wargaming have made them so bad. I think they're only like 140mm, which it's not like terrible in tier 7, but as soon as you start playing up against tier 9s, where you're playing up against things like the hard case, you have genuinely no chance. And even when you're using your premium rounds, the APDS rounds, which get a better penetration and better shell velocity, so they're really good if you're firing at longer ranges, or if you're in kind of a close quarters pursuit of a light tank or something like that. I always typically swap to the APCR rounds, because you don't have to give as much lead time, and it's just easier for you to aim and predict where someone's going to be, because where they are right now is going to be somewhere close to where they're going to be at the end, whereas when you fire with your standard AP rounds, where they are right now, they might have swiveled a little bit more, and so yeah, you end up with that sort of scenario. One thing that you'll note here is we're coming up against a tank that, to all intents and purposes, is pretty bad, but at the same time we're getting some horrible lag. Now the AMX does the absolute dirty and tries to come down the hill and derp us, but unfortunately for him he doesn't manage to do it at all right, so we're not going to complain. But nonetheless, I pinged towards my teammates to actually come over this side. We knew that the T25/2 was over here, but they were still sat in the same position, and although we took a pretty passive position at the beginning of the game, you do have to move. Like, just because it worked at the beginning 3 minutes of the game doesn't mean that you should sit there for the remaining 12 minutes and do absolutely nothing when you could be supporting your team. And especially if they're pinging to where the enemies actually are and you're still sat literally on the opposite side of the map to where people are, then yeah, it can be a very painful as a teammate. And also, if you're just trying to win the game, it's also very painful, especially when you're kind of sat that far back to the point where you then move up and get taken out straight away. But nonetheless, we managed to carry the game because they're focused on the teammates, which at the end of the day, I'm not too bothered about. But there we go, we finish off the T25/2, win the game, and victory of course for that result. Now we pick up 3,379 damage within this game, 2,027 base experience with 8 enemies destroyed, which of course grants us a very nice result in terms of how much silver we made for a tier 7, remember, that only gets 35% bonus silver. Nice XP, this wasn't with any boosts or anything like that. And of course, a ton of XP, not that it really means much on a premium, but remember this is an actual tech tree tank in the Comet if you actually want to play it. It's basically the same tank. I think there's maybe a few minor differences, but the premise of the tank is exactly the same as to how you can play it. So here are the medal section. We managed to pick up a mastery badge, of course, Devastator, Radley Walters for destroying 8 or 9 enemy vehicles in the game, Top Gun, Duelist, Bruiser, Fire for Effect, High Caliber, and yeah, we managed to do pretty much like 75%, well, less than that. We pretty much did like half the damage in the entire game, just on our own, bar like 1,000 damage or something like that. But yeah, a really, really great game in the Comet. Let's take a look at another one just to showcase some other different scenarios and how you can play these sort of tanks. Now then, if passive gameplay is what you're after, this replay is a lot less passive, and we're going to do some risky stuff within this gameplay, and that's all that you should be thinking about really when playing tanks like this. Is it going to be worth it for me to do this scenario? Is it going to benefit me? Is it going to be negatively impact me? Am I going to get to this position? And you have to weigh it up. The risk to reward ratio, does it actually stack up? And you have to assess that during the game. Always, for me personally, if I want to make sure I have the best chances of winning, then I don't typically YOLO into a position at the beginning of the game, because for me, YOLOing into a position where I have a 50-50 chance of whether someone's going to spot me before I get there, which may mean I have a fantastic game if they don't, and I have an amazing game, but it's a 50-50. If it doesn't work, I get taken out, and that means that ultimately, yes, I could have 50% of the time I could have an amazing game, but the other time I could have a terrible game, and I'd much rather have a very consistent good game every single time, and then occasionally during those games you then take a little bit more of a risk to then push in and make those amazing games happen rather than doing it at the very start. One thing that you'll notice here is that we managed to ram the Vanguard and take 0 damage. It's something you can do with the Comet. Effectively, it's a fast medium that has a little bit of weight to it. You shouldn't be ramming any heavy tanks, don't worry. I'm not saying that you should do that, but yeah, overall the Comet is fantastic and I really do love playing it. But one thing that we can kind of go back to within that conversation about where you should be positioning yourself was, well, for example, if I'd have gone straight across the field right at the beginning of the game, there's like the entire enemy tanks over there, which it's not good, is it? If I went over there, I would have pretty much been all alone at this point, bar the light tank, and we're not going to be able to do anything on our own against like 10 tanks all at once. So that's kind of one big problem that you will have with that sort of scenario. Now, the Oni here is a prime target. Any slow tank that you'll be coming up against with a Comet, or any fast firing tank for that matter, the key thing is to find the meaty targets where you can just keep going against them and where you can keep just punishing them for every single move that they make. What you're seeing in this replay now is more of an aggressive kind of start. So the game goes from being pretty passive to a fully aggressive game, and we're trying to just put in some rounds against opponents. And much like I talked about with the Oni, we're finding the big targets that you're not really going to miss, especially with the accuracy of this vehicle. And so you can do things like this and start pumping all of the vehicles. You'll also find that because you're firing a lot more, tanks like this are an amazing way of you actually get better at aiming within the game, because there are so many people that are restricted by the fact that they maybe haven't had enough experience aiming at targets on the move. Maybe they don't want to fire at a target on the move because if they miss, they've got such a long reload that they then like end up kind of being heavily impacted because of their decision to fire and then missing, and therefore they're less confident of doing it, and therefore they never do it, which means that they never get better. So one thing I would always suggest to every player at some point during your World of Tanks experience, play a fast firing medium tank that's going to enable you to do the things that we've just talked about, where you can practice and kind of get to grips with things. One thing that you're seeing here, this is the risk to reward ratio. I could sit back and I could wait for someone else to do the exact same thing that I'm doing right now, or I could potentially get into this sort of position. Now, this is a position I've used multiple times on modder tanks, and bearing in mind that the hill over to our left gives us a little bit of support against anyone that's over in that sort of direction, but it also provides us a nice kind of view of the opponents that have kind of crossed towards. Now, you're seeing a cruncher here sat out in the open, and we can continually punish them. Now, this is something that I've always liked doing in the game when the opportunity arises. If possible, I don't try and force it. You should never try and force positions in modder tanks. You just have to know about a lot of different positions you can utilize, and then pick the best one for the game scenario that you've got going. So in this scenario, the majority of the enemy team have pushed through the kind of left hand side of the map, and now they've crossed. So this is in a fantastic position to get hold down. It also stops anyone from YOLOing. Had this position been or had a different scenario in the game happened where maybe they'd moved up to the closer side of the hill and they were actually pushing that area, then this would be a terrible position. They can get a shot, I have no cover, I've got nothing to put in between me and the opponent. I can't try and bait them like the cruncher. You're seeing me kind of trying to bait the cruncher here, and although, you know, I knew that we're going to take that shell, I can put in another one and we can kind of go in that sort of position. So, and not only have we been pumping out a load of damage, we also got a ton of assistance, and that's something else that can be said for being in positions like this and knowing positions to go into, is that not only do you get actual damage, but you can really support your team to have the higher results where you're able to do both the damage and also the assistance and get the enemies destroyed and just generally get more XP, silver, etc. And you can see here, picking up another mastery badge in this result and picking up 4,500 combined damage. So really great one. Hopefully you did enjoy this replay. Of course, don't forget to check out some of the other replays and commentaries that we've done on gameplay for hundreds of tanks, I think, at this point on the channel. So take a look at those. If you want anything else, leave them in the comment section down below if you want specifics. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.